This man survived a plane crash, and just 6 days later he bought a lottery ticket and ended up winning $1 million. And today we're going to be talking about 3 stories just like that one of the most lucky, unlucky people of all time. Each story gets progressively more insane, so stick around till the end. And we're going to get it started with Tsutomu Yamaguchi. Sorry if I just absolutely butchered that. He was a 29-year-old naval engineer who was on the last day of a 3-month-long business trip in Hiroshima. At around 8:15 in the morning, he was walking to work a final time when he heard the sound of an aircraft overhead. When he looked up, he saw a plane soar over the city and drop a small object attached to a parachute. Before he could really focus onto the object attached to the parachute and try to figure out what it was, the sky erupted in a blaze of light as if the earth had just fallen into the sun. He had just enough time to dive into a ditch before an ear-splitting boom rang out. Because here's the thing, Tsutomu's last day in Hiroshima was August 6th, 1945, and that wasn't some ordinary plane, it was an American B-29 bomber plane. And that small object attached to the parachute was a nuke named Little Boy, and it was the first of 2 nukes that America would drop on Japan during World War II. The shockwave that accompanied the nuke sucked Tsutomu from the ground, spun him in the air like a tornado, and sent him hurtling into a nearby potato patch. He had just been less than 2 miles from ground zero. His face and forearms had been burned, and both his eardrums were ruptured, but he was alive. He made his way to the train station, which was somehow still operating despite a damn nuke being dropped on the city. He returned to his hometown and was relieved to see that his wife and infant son were okay, as only Hiroshima was attacked. Tsutomu was apparently a very dedicated worker, as he returned to work just 3 days later. And as he was describing his experience to his supervisor, the landscape outside suddenly exploded with another bright white flash. He dropped to the ground just seconds before the shockwave shattered the office windows and sent broken glass and debris flying through the room. Because here's the thing, the date was August 9th, 1945, and Tsutomu's hometown and where his office was located was Nagasaki. So that powerful explosion that just went off outside was the second nuke that America would drop on Japan, named Fat Man. And it was even more powerful than the one dropped on Hiroshima. He was again just 2 miles from ground zero, but this time he emerged relatively unhurt. In total, Little Boy, which was the nuke dropped on Hiroshima, would kill about 140,000 people. And Fat Man, which was dropped on Nagasaki, would kill about 80,000. And yet Tsutomu, who was 2 miles from ground zero of both explosions, survived. He ended up living a normal life after the attacks and managed to live until 2010, where he died at the age of 93. But Tsutomu's story is truly nothing compared to Bill Morgan's story. Next up, back in 1999, a 37-year-old Australian truck driver named Bill Morgan was driving his usual routes when he was suddenly involved in a car accident that nearly crushed him. He miraculously survived the crash, but suffered a heart attack as a result. He was then rushed to the emergency room where he was given a drug that caused an insane allergic reaction that ultimately caused his heart to stop beating. He had just died, but that wasn't the end for him. After being clinically dead for 14 minutes, he remained comatose. Basically, he was in a vegetative state. Doctors actually advised his family 2 times to take him off life support and let him die, since usually when someone is clinically dead for 14 minutes, like Bill was, the person may have suffered brain damage and may be in the vegetative state forever. But it's a good thing his family didn't do it, because after 12 days he miraculously came out of his coma and was shockingly completely fine. He suffered no apparent brain damage or other health problems and made a complete recovery. With a new shot at life, he was very optimistic about the future, so he got a new job so he wouldn't have to be a truck driver anymore. And he mustered up the courage to propose to his long-term girlfriend Lisa Wells, who happily accepted. Soon after his engagement, he was feeling pretty lucky, not only to be alive, but to have his girlfriend agree to marry him. So he decided to try his luck at the lottery. He purchased a scratch-off ticket and instantly won a Toyota Corolla, which was worth about $23,000 at the time. Bill was expectedly overjoyed. These lucky turn of events soon caught the interest of a local news station who wanted to cover Bill's story. And this is where things get very interesting. They asked Bill if he could buy a lotto ticket and scratch it off on camera as a sort of reenactment of his winning scratch. He happily obliged, so the reenactment footage shows Bill buying another lotto ticket. After scratching the ticket on camera though, he stopped, looked at the camera, and instead of saying something like, "I just won a car" as part of the reenactment, he instead says, "I just won $250,000. I'm not joking. That's right, live on TV while reenacting his past win, he got an even bigger win. And that $250,000 he won is about $444,000 in today's money. Bill immediately called his fiancée and told her the good news and that they would now be able to afford a house as they had been living in a caravan. But believe it or not, Bill's story is nothing compared to Fran Selek's story. From 1929 until 1963, 32-year-old Croatian man Fran Selek had never been on a plane before. But in 1963, his mother had suddenly fallen ill and he wanted to make sure he could make it to her in time before she passed away. So this made him take his first flight, but the earliest flight from Zagreb to Rijeka, where his mother lived, was fully booked. He explained to the airline that he was having a family emergency, and that actually convinced the crew to take him on. But he had to sit in the rear of the plane next to the flight attendant. Everything was fine until right before landing when the plane had a technical malfunction and started losing altitude. This led to one of the plane's doors flying open and sucking Fran out of the plane at a height of 2,600 feet. All 17 passengers and crew would pass away in the crash, but against all odds, Fran would survive by landing on a haystack. But that is just one of the 7 close encounters with death that Fran would end up surviving. The year before the plane crash, so 1962, he was on a train from Sarajevo to Dubrovnik when it suddenly derailed and crashed into an icy river, killing 17 passengers. But despite suffering from hypothermia and a broken arm, he was able to swim to safety. Then 4 years later in 1966, he was on a bus that skidded into a river, leaving 4 dead while he swam to the banks and suffered only minor injuries like cuts and bruises. After his terrifying experiences with public transportation, he decided to get his own car. But in 1970, he was driving his car when it suddenly caught fire. He was lucky to get out of the car just before it exploded. Then 3 years later in 1973, another of his cars caught fire. But this time he caught fire and almost lost all of his hair, but other than that, he had no major injuries. After 22 accident-free years, he thought he had outlived his curse. But in 1995, while in Zagreb, while walking, he was hit by a bus, but miraculously, he survived with only a few injuries. The following year, he was driving in the Croatian mountains when an oncoming truck caused him to swerve off a 300-foot cliff. He managed to jump out of the car at the last second and got caught in a tree branch, which stopped his fall. From the branch, he saw his car plummet downward, hit the ground, and explode. But his life completely changed in 2003 when he tried his luck at the lottery. He ended up winning $1 million in the Croatian lottery, which is about $1.6 million in today's money. He would use the money to buy a luxury home on a private island and took care of his friends and family. After everything he went through, I think he deserved the money. Anyways guys, if you want to learn about more weird, random, interesting things you wouldn't see or learn anywhere else, then be sure to subscribe. Thank you again for watching. See ya.